Now, we also asked a question of, and sorry, I should note from this point on, unless I otherwise stated, I will be focusing in on the revised survey results. So one of the questions, and this is one that we did ask on the original and the revised survey, which gives us a little larger sample to work with. So we asked, if the police showed up during an accidental overdose, in your opinion, how likely is it that a person present would be charged with any offense? And you see here that 28% of people thought that there probably was a chance that someone would be charged. 55% said maybe, and only 17% felt that there was no chance that someone would be charged at an overdose. And this clearly ties into the response that we had seen about individuals fearing arrest at an overdose. Now, we'd also asked a question about individuals who indicated that they had done training. We asked them to elaborate on what kind of training that they had done. Some of this is positive. We can see the first response, 32% of people who had done training, and that was about 19% indicated they had done some training. 32% of those people indicated they had CPR or first aid training. Unfortunately, the next one is a bit of a concern, as 13% indicated that they were self-taught, and that was the training. POW is a local training, so we're pleased to see that those responses are quite high. The other training was really all over the map, some of it positive, most of it not. And then there was a number of individuals that used this written response as an opportunity to add some of their comments, and the comments didn't necessarily indicate that they had actually done training as they indicated. Now, another concern within our results, it seems that we are likely overestimating still the likelihood of individuals calling in the future. This isn't necessarily that respondents aren't being accurate anymore, but when we look at the breakdown of our sample, it seems that the individuals who are most likely to witness an overdose in the future and be present at an overdose in the future are the least likely group to call, which may indicate that calling rates are an overestimate in our survey. There was a statistically significant difference here among individuals who in the past had witnessed an overdose compared to those who had not witnessed an overdose. Among people who had not witnessed an overdose in the past, 66% indicated that they would call 911 and wait in the future. However, amongst individuals who had witnessed an overdose in the past, 53% indicated they would not call 911 in future if they witnessed an overdose. This is a concern. As we had said before, past presence at an overdose is a likely indicator of an indicator of the likelihood of being present at an overdose in the future. We also had a little bit of concern as individuals who had witnessed an overdose in the past were the most likely in our sample to indicate that they were afraid of being arrested at a future overdose. Now, we also asked a question and compared calling rates amongst individuals who had called in the past. This was a bit of a positive finding for us. We saw that people present when 911 was called in the past were more likely to call in the future. This isn't an overly surprising result, but it is pleasing to see that individuals are still likely to call in future if they witness an overdose. And this next one, I want to reiterate my theme that individuals who are likely to witness an overdose seem like they're the least likely in our sample to call. We did a cross-tabulation. We compared the results of individuals who had used an illegal drug in the past year to their likelihood of calling in the future. And what we found was that individuals who had not used illegal drugs in the past year, 65% of them indicated they would call and wait for help to arrive, whereas individuals who had used illegal drugs in the past year, 49% indicated they would call and wait, and 51% indicated they would not call. And the last demographic that I want to highlight for you is that age seems to matter in terms of likelihood of calling 911. As individuals get older in our sample, so those above 46 are 70% chance, indicated a 70% chance that they would call in future. Individuals 30 to 45, a 57% chance, and individuals 16 to 29, a 42% chance of calling and waiting. And as I mentioned, these results are statistically significant. So at this point, that summarizes our findings. I want to turn it over to Michael, who's going to walk through the policy options that we found in the literature.
Great. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Kayla. The bulk of the study is focused on the study itself, but we did identify a few existing practices within North America, and I'll just talk really quickly about them. The first option is, of course, overdose prevention, including naloxone. These are typically take-home naloxone programs. They're widespread throughout the USA and other parts of the world, including a national program in Scotland. The second option that we identified is something called Good Samaritan overdose legislation, and I think about a dozen states south of us have such legislation pending in other states, and the essence of the legislation is really to provide limited immunity for witnesses or bystanders to an overdose emergency. And the purpose of the law is to encourage people to call 911 during an overdose emergency. And the legislation typically provides limited immunity for fairly minor offenses such as simple possession. It doesn't provide immunity from other more serious offenses such as weapons or larger scale trafficking. So if you Google Good Samaritan legislation, all kinds of things will pop up from the U.S., and I would encourage you to do so. Early evaluation out of the University of Washington suggests that 88% of people who are using opioids were aware of the legislation in their state and more likely to call during the next overdose emergency, more likely to call 911. The third practice that we speak about very briefly in the report and is a practice from Canada. It's in Vancouver, and in 2003 the Vancouver Police Department established an interim policy of what we call routine non-attendance at non-fatal overdose emergency calls. That's a policy that was later affirmed and became standing practice in 2006. And what that policy says is that if a witness to an overdose calls 911, then it's really just the ambulance who shows up. Police do not, as a matter of course, attend those emergencies unless it's a fatal overdose, unless foul play is suspected, unless emergency medical team asks for police assistance. The program anecdotally seems to be working well, and had a few conversations with a variety of police officers at a variety of levels in Vancouver, but there's been no formal evaluation that's ever been completed by about the policy. We do reference the policy in its entirety in the back of the report and in the back of the 911 barriers report. So those are the three sort of policy options that we were looking at, and like any good crime prevention council, we established an ad hoc committee following the report, and it was multi-sectoral. All the first responders were present and some folks from the community. They chewed through those three recommendations, and what came off the table was routine non-attendance for a whole host of reasons. I won't go into all the details here, except to say where we did end up was a recommendation to support Good Samaritan legislation should it ever come to pass or be tabled, or in Canada. In Canada, it would be a federal responsibility, so that's different than the U.S. where individual states can pass such legislation. Here, because we're dealing with the criminal code and other statutes, it would really be a federal mandate right across, and it would apply right across Canada. So that was the first option, and there are some discussions about Good Samaritan legislation in Canada. They're very, very early days, and certainly no law and policy makers at that table. And if you were dialed in last week, the Canada Centre on Substance Abuse, an advisory to the federal government, released their report on dealing with the prescription crisis with the opioid crisis in Canada. absent from that report is any mention of Good Samaritan type legislation. Not a big surprise from people in the field. Currently, our federal government specifically excludes prescription medications from the anti-drug strategy and excludes harm reduction from the approaches that they're willing to undertake.